The fluorescent hum of the cubicle maze, ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing was a dull thrum against my temples. It was a sound I'd grown accustomed to, a soundtrack to my own slow erosion. Each ring was a tiny shard of glass, chipping away at my patience, at my already thin hope. I stared at the spreadsheet, numbers blurring into a meaningless gray smear. Another Tuesday, another 8 hours trapped in this beige purgatory. My fingers, stained with the cheap ink of 1,000 discarded pens, hovered over the keyboard, refusing to obey. What was the point? The numbers would still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, stretching out like an infinite oppressive desert. My own apartment felt like a distant memory, a place I'd escaped from to find. This, a promotion they'd called it, a move to a bigger office, more responsibility. It felt more like a gilded cage, each partition a cell, each shared glance a silent accusation of inadequacy. My stomach churned with a familiar knot of anxiety. Rent was due again. The car was making that worrying rattle. Raj, I'd tell myself, I read treading water. Barely. Then the email arrived. Not through the usual corporate channels, but a personal one, sent from an address that looked like it had been typed with mittens. Regarding the estate of Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne. The name meant nothing to me. My family tree was a stunted sapling, its branches bare. I'd never heard of an Elias Thorne. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't indulged in years, pricked at me. I clicked. The legal jargon was dense, archaic. It spoke of deeds and trusts, of a distant kinship, a forgotten branch on my family's withered tree. Elias Thorne, my great uncle, thrice removed, a man I'd never met, had passed, and he had left me everything. My first instinct was disbelief, a cynical scoff that died in my throat. This had to be a scam, some elaborate phishing attempt, but the accompanying documents, scanned and notarized, seemed legitimate. And then I saw it, the clause, the one that made my breath hitch. To my sole surviving heir, Raj, I bequeath my ancestral home, Thorne Manor, and all its contents. In addition, a sum of $1 million, to be released upon his taking up residence within the aforementioned property for a period of no less than 1 calendar year. $1 million. The words hung in the stale air of the cubicle maze, ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing, shimmering like a mirage. It was an impossible sum, a lottery ticket delivered by spectral post. My fingers trembled as I scrolled down. The will went on to detail the property's location. A remote stretch of land, miles from any town, accessible only by a private, unpaved road. It was described as secluded, isolated. The word sent a faint tremor through me, a whisper of unease that I quickly pushed aside. The phone, which had been a persistent irritant, suddenly fell silent. The abrupt quiet was more jarring than the ringing had been. I looked around. The other cubicles were empty, their occupants having long since fled the fluorescent hum. The only light now came from my monitor, casting a pale, sickly glow on my face. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching myself from across the room. I reread the email, the will, the attached photographs. Thorne Manor. It looked less like a home and more like a tomb, yet beneath the decay there was a grandeur, a sense of history that tugged at something deep within me. A place where secrets slept. A place that promised an escape from this suffocating reality. The money. The sheer, life-altering amount of it. It was a golden key, a way out of the cubicle maze, ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing, and into what? The thought of leaving this place, of breathing air that didn't smell of recycled anxiety and stale coffee, was intoxicating. But the isolation, it was a stark contrast to the constant, low-level hum of human proximity I'd grown accustomed to. Was it a trap, a morbid joke, or was it an opportunity? My heart, which I had thought was long since numb, began to beat with a new, insistent rhythm. It wasn't the frantic pounding of fear, but something else. A slow, heavy thud, like a drumbeat heralding a change. I saved the email, then closed my laptop. The spreadsheet was forgotten. The cubicle maze, ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing, seemed to recede, its dull hum fading into the background. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely heavy, and walked out of the office. Not towards the elevator, but towards the exit. The outside air, even the city's polluted breath, felt like a liberation. The name echoed in my mind, a siren song from a forgotten shore. What awaited me in that silent, brooding house? The lawyer, a man whose suit smelled faintly of mothballs and regret, pushed a thick envelope across the scarred mahogany desk. Inside, the will. Inside the will, the impossible, $1 million. It was a lottery ticket delivered by spectral post. The will went on to detail the property's location, a place called Blackwood Manor, inherited from a great aunt I'd never heard of. The address was a string of numbers and a road name so remote it felt like a misprint. The solicitor cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. The stipulations are clear, Mr. Raj. I must reside there for a minimum of 6 months to claim the full inheritance. He didn't meet my eyes. His gaze was fixed on a framed certificate of some kind of accreditation, the glass dulled with fingerprints. 6 months. In a house that sounded more like a crypt. But $1 million, that was enough to change everything. Enough to escape the fluorescent hum of this place, the endless spreadsheets, the gnawing feeling that my life was a slow, suffocating descent. The drive was long, the asphalt eventually giving way to a rutted dirt track that clawed its way through an oppressive, ancient forest. The trees, gnarled and dark, seemed to lean in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the car. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic like old blood. Blackwood Manor rose from the gloom like a forgotten tombstone. Ivy choked its walls, obscuring the details, giving it the appearance of a forgotten ruin. The key, heavy and ornate, turned in the lock with a groan that echoed through the stillness. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating an interior that spoke of long abandonment. Furniture draped in white sheets stood like ghostly sentinels. My first night was a symphony of creaks and groans. The old house settled, I told myself. Pipes groaned, wind howled through unseen cracks, but there was a cadence to the sounds, a rhythm that felt deliberate. A soft scraping sound from the hallway, like fingernails dragging across wood. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I strained my ears, just the wind. I explored the house, trying to impose order on the chaos of its past. Cobwebs draped like macabre decorations. In the library, rows of leather-bound books stood sentinel, their pages brittle with age. I ran my fingers along the spines, the leather cool and dry. It was thicker than the others. Its title in a language I didn't recognize. I dropped the book. It landed with a muffled thud, and a puff of dust billowed out, smelling faintly of almonds. I was making a simple meal, the clatter of pots and pans a small rebellion against the pervasive quiet. Suddenly, a low hum started, emanating from somewhere within the walls. It was a deep, resonant sound, like a monstrous engine idling in the earth beneath me. It vibrated through the floor, up my legs, into my teeth. I stopped stirring my soup, my spoon clattering against the ceramic bowl. The hum intensified, a pressure building in my ears. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. It felt like a held breath. Later, as I was preparing for bed, I heard it again. The scraping, closer this time, just outside my door. I froze, my body rigid, every nerve screaming. I could almost feel the presence on the other side of the wood, a weight pressing against the grain. My mind conjured images long. Pale fingers, sharp and deliberate, scratching at the door. I clenched my fists, my grip tight. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. I held my breath, listening. The scraping stopped. A floorboard creaked, impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. It was from the landing just outside my room. Then nothing. There was I hearing things. There was the isolation getting to me, or was something else making itself known? The lawyer's office, that cubicle maze. Ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing, felt like a tomb even before the will. Now, holding the thin paper, the promise of a fortune, it felt like a trap sprung. The ringing phone, a frantic, insistent pulse, was the only sound besides my own ragged breath. I shoved the will into my jacket pocket, the crisp paper a stark contrast to the worn fabric. "Thank I managed, my voice a dry rasp. The lawyer nodded, his eyes sliding away, already focused on the next ringing phone, the next desperate hope. I turned and walked out, the city's noise a sudden, jarring assault after the muffled quiet of his space. But even the roar of traffic felt distant, muted, as if the news of the inheritance had already begun to build a wall around me. The drive to the mansion was long. The GPS, after a series of increasingly confused beeps, finally surrendered, its screen going blank. I was left with a tattered map and a growing sense of unease. The paved road dissolved into gravel, then into a rutted track swallowed by overgrown trees. Sunlight, once a steady companion, became a hesitant visitor, dappled and fleeting through the dense canopy. The air grew heavy, damp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and something else, something earthy, ancient. It clung to the inside of my car, a cloying perfume. The mansion loomed out of the mist like a forgotten sentinel. It was larger than I'd imagined, its stone facade stained dark with age and weather. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared out from beneath heavy, moss-laden brows. A single massive oak door, its wood warped and splintered, stood as the only entrance. As I stepped out of the car, the silence descended, absolute and unnerving. No birdsong, no rustle of unseen creatures, just the soft thud of my own footsteps on the overgrown path. A shiver traced its way down my spine, a cold, unwelcome guest. The key, a heavy, ornate thing, turned with a groan in the lock. Dust motes danced in the few shafts of light that pierced the gloom. The scent of damp stone and forgotten lives permeated everything. I called out, "Hello." My voice, swallowed by the vastness, seemed to echo back, distorted and mocking. Days bled into a week. The initial excitement of the inheritance, the sheer surrealism of it all, began to fray. My phone, once a lifeline, had no signal. The landline in the hall, a hulking black bakelite monstrosity, was dead. I tried the car, but the battery inexplicably was drained. I was marooned. The isolation at first felt like a necessary consequence of this grand, forgotten place. I told myself it was just the remoteness, the lack of modern amenities. Then the subtle things started. A floorboard creaking upstairs when I was downstairs. I dismissed them as the house settling, the wind playing tricks. I was alone. After all, my mind was probably conjuring things. I focused on unpacking, on cataloging the few possessions the will mentioned, a meager collection of antique furniture and dusty books. One evening, while sorting through a stack of old photographs in the library, I found one of myself. I was younger, maybe 10, standing in my childhood bedroom. It was a room I hadn't thought about in years, a room filled with the ghosts of my deepest anxieties. The photograph was sharp, clear, and utterly impossible. I'd never shown anyone that particular photo, not even my parents. It was tucked away in a box of my own personal mementos, a box I'd left behind. How could it be here? My hands trembled as I held it. The Raj in the picture looked small, vulnerable, his eyes wide with a fear I remembered all too well. They weren't just sounds anymore. They were words, just at the edge of audibility, laced with a venom that twisted my gut. They spoke of my failures, my insecurities, the things I tried so hard to bury. They reminded me of the time I froze during a presentation, the harsh laughter that followed. They conjured the memory of a childhood bully, his sneering face, the shame that burned in my chest. The air grew thick, suffocating. I could feel eyes on me, unseen but palpable. I started sleeping with a heavy iron poker from the fireplace beside my bed. The house was no longer just old, it was aware. It was learning me. It was peeling back the layers of my carefully constructed composure, exposing the raw, quivering nerves beneath. Was I losing my mind, or was the house actively feeding on my fear? The ringing phone in the cubicle maze, ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing was still vibrating when I finally signed. A greasy smudge on the receiver. I didn't answer, let it bleed into the stale air. The lawyer, a man whose suit seemed permanently creased, pushed a stack of papers across the desk. His face was a map of tired veins. He didn't meet my eyes. "Everything is in order, Mr. Raj, the deed, the keys, the stipulations." Stipulations, that was the word, not conditions, not requirements. Stipulations, like a doctor writing down what I'd already lost. I clutched the folder, the thick paper rough against my palm. The wealth was real. The house, too. A place I'd never seen, a relative I'd never met. It felt less like an inheritance and more like a debt being collected. I walked out of that sterile box, the air outside thick with exhaust fumes and the distant wail of a siren. It was a welcome noise, a reminder of a world that still functioned, that still shouted. The mansion sat on a hill, a hunched shadow against a bruised twilight sky, not dilapidated as I'd first thought. It was more neglected, as if it had been left to its own devices for so long. It had begun to forget its own shape. Overgrown ivy choked the stone walls, a suffocating embrace. The windows were dark, like vacant eyes. The air here was different, still, heavy. It pressed in on me, muffling the sounds of the world I'd left behind. Inside, dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, dried flowers, and something else. something metallic like old blood or rust. My footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, each one a pronouncement of my intrusion. I moved from room to room, a phantom in a mausoleum. The furniture was draped in white sheets, like shrouded figures waiting for a resurrection. In the library, the shelves sagged under the weight of leather-bound volumes, their titles unreadable in the dim light. I ran my hand along a spine. The leather was cool, almost damp. That night, sleep offered no refuge. Not with voices, not yet, but with creaks and groans that seemed to follow a rhythm, a slow, deliberate pulse. The wind outside howled, but it sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. I tossed and turned on the vast, unfamiliar bed, the sheets smelling faintly of lavender and decay. I kept seeing the lawyer's eyes, the way they slid away when he mentioned the stipulations. What were they? The will was vague, all about residing in the mansion, maintaining it, and a curious clause about honoring the house's memory. By the third day, the initial awe had curdled into a gnawing unease. I found myself drawn to the library again. The sheer volume of books was staggering. Who had read them? Who had lived here surrounded by this silent testament to forgotten lives? I pulled a heavy volume from the shelf. Its title, embossed in faded gold, read, Chronicles of the Estate. The pages were brittle, yellowed. The ink was a deep, rich black. The handwriting elegant, almost calligraphic. It spoke of the land, the construction of the house, the families who had lived and died within its walls. But as I delved deeper, the tone shifted. The entries became sparse, the handwriting more frantic. One passage, dated over a century ago, sent a shiver down my spine. I told myself it was just history, the ramblings of old minds. But the metallic scent in the air seemed stronger now, more insistent. I walked to one of the tall windows, pushing aside a heavy velvet curtain. The grounds outside were shrouded in a mist that hadn't been there earlier. It clung to the trees, obscuring their gnarled branches, making them look like skeletal fingers reaching out. A sudden, sharp rap echoed from somewhere downstairs. My breath hitched. I hadn't heard a car. No one knew I was here. My hand trembled as I reached for the book again, flipping through the pages, searching for something, anything, that explained the sounds, the smells, the suffocating atmosphere. Was I just tired? There was the isolation playing tricks on me, or was something in this house waking up? The book lay open on the mahogany desk, its pages brittle and yellowed, smelling of dust and something else, something faintly coppery. I'd been reading about the family who built this place, generations of them, each entry more unsettling than the last. Stories of peculiarities, of people who vanished, of whispers that drove others mad. The metallic scent was definitely stronger now, clinging to the back of my throat. My hands, resting on the desk's cool, smooth surface, felt clammy. I forced myself to stand, the old chair groaning in protest. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. I walked towards the tall windows, the ones overlooking the overgrown gardens. Night had fully descended, painting the world outside in shades of charcoal and ink. The wind, a low moan through the ancient oaks, was the only sound, or was it? I strained my ears. A faint, rhythmic thump-thump seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a slow, deliberate beat. My pulse quickened. It was just the house settling, I told myself. Old houses do that. But this felt different, it felt alive. My gaze drifted to the framed portraits lining the hallway. The faces, stern and unsmiling, seemed to watch me, their painted eyes following my every move. I tried to ignore them, tried to dismiss them as mere decoration, but tonight they felt like an audience to my growing unease. The thump-thump intensified, a dull drumbeat now echoing the frantic rhythm of my own heart. I could feel a prickle of sweat tracing a path down my temple. I needed to get out of this room. I needed air. I moved towards the grand staircase, the ornate banister cool and slick beneath my hand. Each step creaked, a lonely protest in the vast silence, and the thump-thump, it was louder here, resonating from somewhere deep within the house's foundations. It felt like a heartbeat, a monstrous ancient heart. I found myself drawn to a heavy oak door at the far end of the hall, a door I hadn't noticed before. There was no handle, no visible lock, just a single, intricate symbol carved into its surface. A spiral twisting inwards. I reached out, my fingers tracing the rough edges of the carving. A jolt, like static electricity, shot up my arm. I snatched my hand back, my breath catching in my throat. The thump-thump stopped. The portraits in the hall seemed to lean forward, their painted gazes now fixed on the oak door. My eyes darted around the hall, searching for, I didn't know what, a reason, an explanation. The metallic scent was overwhelming now, thick and cloying. It felt like I was standing in the belly of something vast and hungry. A low hum began, a vibration that started in the floorboards and traveled up my legs, through my entire body. It was a resonant sound, deep and guttural, like a massive engine coming to life. The oak door shuddered. The symbol on its surface began to glow with a faint, sickly green light. My muscles tensed, my body rigid with a primal fear I'd never known. I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet were rooted to the spot. Then a voice, not with my ears, but inside my head, a voice like grinding stones. "You are ours now." The words echoed, not just in my mind, but in the very air around me. The green light pulsed, growing brighter. The hum intensified, making my teeth ache. The oak door groaned, not like wood, but like a living thing in pain. It moved with impossible speed, flowing across the floor towards me. I finally broke free of my paralysis, stumbling backward, my hands flying up to shield my face. My foot caught on something, and I fell hard, the impact jarring my teeth. The metallic scent was now a stench, a putrid, nauseating odor that burned my nostrils. I turned and ran, not back towards the staircase, but towards the rear of the hall, towards a small, nondescript door I'd never paid attention to. My fingers fumbled with the latch, breath coming in ragged gasps. I could feel its icy tendrils brushing against my ankles. I yanked the door open and plunged through, slamming it shut behind me. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on a disorienting expanse of gray partitions. Rows upon rows of identical drab cubicles stretched out before me, a claustrophobic labyrinth. And then I heard it. Ring, ring, ring. A single phone, somewhere in the vast, echoing space, was ringing. I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the cool, metallic side of a cubicle. My body trembled uncontrollably, waiting, listening. The phone continued its relentless cry, a maddening counterpoint to my own ragged breathing. What was this place, and how had it found me? The ringing. It was still ringing, a frantic, desperate sound that clawed at the edges of my sanity. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against my ears, but the noise was inside my head now, a phantom echo that pulsed with my racing pulse. "Get up, Raj, get up." My own voice, a thin thread of defiance against the suffocating fear. I forced my limbs to move, stiff and unwilling, pushing off the cold metal of the cubicle. The floor was a sticky, grimy film beneath my bare feet. I hadn't worn shoes since. Since when? The days blurred, the memory of the outside world growing fainter with each passing hour. My gaze swept the desolate landscape of the cubicle maze, ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing. The air hung thick with the scent of decay and something metallic, like old pennies. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that pierced the gloom from unseen sources. The ringing phone, a single, jarring note in the oppressive silence, seemed to beckon me, or perhaps mock me. It was the only tangible thing in this shifting labyrinth, the only sign of a world that might still exist beyond these suffocating walls. I had to reach it. It was a foolish hope, I knew, but it was all I had. My feet shuffled forward, each step a struggle against an invisible current. The maze seemed to shift and writhe around me, the gray partitions stretching and contracting like some monstrous, breathing organism. I kept my eyes fixed on the source of the sound, a small, black object perched precariously on a desk in the distance. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, a siren's call to a drowning man. As I neared, the ringing intensified, each shrill burst a physical blow. My breath hitched. The desk was cluttered with the detritus of forgotten lives, yellowed papers, a cracked coffee mug, a dried-out pen, and the phone. It was an old rotary model, its black plastic worn smooth by countless hands. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and snatched it from its cradle. The ringing stopped abruptly, plunging the maze back into a deafening silence. Nothing, no dial tone, no voice, just the dead weight of the receiver in my hand. I slumped against the desk, the rough wood scraping against my skin, so faint I almost dismissed it as the wind, but there was no wind in this place. It slithered through the air, a sibilant sound that prickled the hairs on my arms. "You can't leave, Raj." My head snapped up. The voice was familiar, yet alien. I spun around, my eyes darting from one cubicle to the next. Just the endless rows of identical gray boxes, the water-stained ceiling tiles marking my every move. "This is your inheritance." I recoiled, stumbling backward. The will, the cryptic promise of wealth. It wasn't money, was it? It was this. This prison, this house that knew my deepest fears and twisted them into tangible horrors. This house fed on them. It amplified them. My gaze fell upon a framed photograph on the desk. I'd overlooked it in my frantic rush towards the phone. It was a picture of me, younger, happier, standing with my parents. Their smiles were bright, their eyes full of a love I hadn't realized I'd lost. But as I looked closer, the smiles began to warp, to stretch into grotesque grimaces. My father's mouth twisted into a sneer. I cried out, dropping the phone. It clattered against the desk, the sound unnervingly loud. I scrambled away, my heart racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the image, but it was seared into my mind. When I opened them again, the photograph was gone. The desk was bare, and the cubicle maze seemed to have rearranged itself. The path I had taken was gone, replaced by a solid wall of gray. Panic flared hot and sharp. I was trapped, truly trapped. The house was playing with me, a cat with a terrified mouse. I ran blindly, my breath tearing at my lungs, my bare feet slapping against the grimy floor. I slammed into walls, stumbled over unseen obstacles, my only guide the desperate primal urge to escape. "You're not good enough, Raj. They all laughed at you. You'll always be alone." Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I was running, but I was running in place. The maze was infinite, a cruel joke designed to break me. I leaned against a cubicle wall, my head bowed, my chest heaving. What was the house waiting for? The floor was cool, then sticky. I stumbled, my hands slapping against something slick and yielding. My breath hitched. The metallic tang, so sharp before, now coated my tongue, a coppery rot. I pulled my hands back. They were coated in something dark, viscous, clinging like tar. I scrubbed at them with my sleeve, but the stains spread deeper, darker. The air was thick, heavy, pressing in on my lungs. It smelled of damp earth and something else, something like old pennies left out in the rain. Then the sound, a low, guttural hum, vibrating not just in my ears, but in my bones. It rose and fell, a slow, agonizing sigh that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I wanted to scream, but my throat was a tight, dry knot. My eyes darted around, searching for an exit, a door, anything that wasn't this suffocating, unseen pressure. But there was nothing. Suddenly the hum shifted. It warped, twisted, resolving into a sound I knew with a sickening lurch of my stomach. A phone, ringing, persistent, insistent. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint its location. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a mocking echo in the vast emptiness. I forced myself to move. Each step was a battle against the unseen resistance, the sticky floor clinging to my shoes. The metallic scent intensified, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I was in a place that felt familiar, yet utterly alien. The walls were a dull gray, scarred with countless scuffs and gouges. Fluorescent lights, flickering erratically, cast a sickly yellow glow. I was in a cubicle maze, ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing. The ringing. It was closer now. I followed the sound, pushing through narrow pathways, the gray partitions brushing against my shoulders. The water had a faint, acrid smell, like old bleach. The phone continued its relentless cry, a digital shriek that scraped against my nerves. I rounded a corner and there it was. A standard office phone, black plastic, sitting on a small, battered desk. It was ringing. I reached for it, my hand trembling. The plastic felt unnervingly warm, almost alive. As my fingers neared, the ringing stopped. Silence descended, thick and sudden, more jarring than the noise. My hand hovered over the receiver. I could feel a faint tremor emanating from it, a residual vibration. I slowly lifted it to my ear. Static, a low, crackling hiss like a distant storm, then a voice. I flinched, pulling the receiver away. Who was that? How did they know my name? The house, of course. It knew, it always knew. I set the receiver back down. The moment it touched the cradle, the phone began to ring again. Louder this time, more desperate. I snatched it up. I dropped the receiver, the clatter echoing in the narrow space. The phone continued to ring. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the black object as if it might leap at me. I could see my breath misting in front of my face. The metallic tang was so strong now, it burned my nostrils. I stumbled backwards, my heel catching on the edge of the desk. I fell, my hands landing on the slick, cool surface. The phone's ringing seemed to mock me, a shrill accusation. I scrambled to my feet, my gaze sweeping across the cubicle maze. The walls pulsed faintly, a slow, rhythmic beat that I felt in my own chest. Each doorway, each turn seemed to lead only to another identical corridor, another dead end. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing down, crushing. I ran. My feet slapped against the floor, the sticky residue pulling at me with each step. The ringing pursued me, a phantom sound that never faded, always just behind me. I burst through another partition, my arms scraping against the rough gray surface. The sound of tearing fabric. I kept running, my lungs burning, my vision blurred by a rising tide of panic. Was this it? Was this how it ended? Trapped in this endless, ringing maze with the metallic taste of decay filling my mouth. The house was playing with me, a cat with a trapped mouse. But mice eventually found ways to bite back. Didn't they? The ringing stopped. A soft, final thunk as the handset settled back into its cradle. Silence, but not the quiet I'd known before. This was a held breath, a coiled spring. My own breathing was ragged, each inhale a shallow, painful scrape against my lungs. I was in the cubicle maze, ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing, and now it was just the maze and me and the memory of that sound. My fingers, slick with something I couldn't identify, sweat, traced the cool, laminate surface of my desk. The wood grain felt alien, too smooth, too perfect. I pushed myself up, my knees protesting with a dull ache. The office, if I could call this drab, anonymous space an office, felt vast and empty yet claustrophobic. Each cubicle was a tomb, a perfectly sized box for a life unlived. The air, thick and stale, carried the faint, cloying scent of old paper and something else, something metallic, like rust and blood. I had to get out. The thought was a desperate, primal urge, a bird beating its wings against the bars of a cage. But the maze stretched out, an endless gray labyrinth. Every turn looked the same. I remembered the layout, or thought I did. My former colleagues, their faces blurred and indistinct in my memory, had navigated it with an unnerving ease. They moved like shadows, their footsteps muffled, their voices hushed. The water stains on the ceiling tiles seemed to writhe, coalescing into shifting shapes. Were they just stains? Or was my mind playing tricks, fueled by the fear that had been my constant companion since I'd stepped foot in this damned place? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force the images away. When I opened them, the stains were just stains again. A faint scratching sound. It came from somewhere beyond the cubicle walls, a tiny, insistent rasp, like fingernails on wood or something burrowing. My skin prickled. I strained to hear, my entire being focused on that single, unnerving noise. It stopped, then started again, closer this time. I took a step, then another, moving with a caution I hadn't known I possessed. My shoes made no sound on the worn carpet. It was as if the house itself was absorbing all noise, all evidence of my presence. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. It was coming from the partition to my left. I could feel a vibration through the thin wall, a tremor that ran up my arm as I instinctively reached out. My hand hovered inches from the cheap composite material. The scratching intensified, a desperate, frantic scrabbling. It was directly behind the wall. I could almost feel the presence on the other side, a palpable weight in the air. My breath hitched. I wanted to run, to bolt, to find a door, any door, and wrench it open. But my feet were rooted, my gaze locked on the wall, so faint I almost missed it. A dry, rustling sound, like leaves skittering across pavement. It was too low to make out words, but the tone. I stumbled back, my heart a frantic, trapped thing in my chest. It was the sound of rot, of decay, of things that should have been long dead but refused to stay buried. The scratching stopped. The vibration ceased. The air, for a brief, agonizing moment, was still. Then a soft thump and another. They were coming from above. I looked up. The water-stained ceiling tiles seemed to sag, bulging downwards in places, as if something heavy was pressing on them from the attic. It didn't smell like water. It smelled like damp earth and something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left to fester. Another drop fell, then another. They began to fall faster, a slow, deliberate rain of black liquid. They were all around me, inside my head, burrowing into my thoughts. I saw it then, not with my eyes, but with a sickening certainty that settled deep in my bones. The house wasn't just old. It was alive. And it was hungry. It had been waiting for me. The wealth promised in the will was bait, a lure to draw me into its maw. The ceiling tiles groaned, a sound like ancient timbers shifting under immense pressure. The bulging grew more pronounced. I had to move. The thought was a desperate, last-ditch effort. I spun around, my eyes darting, searching for an exit, any sign of escape. The maze seemed to shift. the angles warping, the paths closing in. A section of the ceiling directly above me began to crack. Not a clean break, but a jagged, splintering tear like decaying flesh, something pale and writhing. The voices were screaming now, a unified shriek of pure, unadulterated need. The black liquid poured down, hot and viscous, splattering against my face. I gagged, stumbling backward, my hands flying to my eyes. The floor beneath me felt soft, yielding, as if the carpet had turned to mud. I heard a tearing sound, loud and final, directly overhead. Then a heavy thud. The rain stopped. My hands, still covering my eyes, felt a strange, sticky texture. I lowered them slowly. The black liquid was everywhere, and on my hands, clinging to my fingers, was something that felt like paper, torn, damp, and brittle. What had fallen from the ceiling? I was in the cubicle maze, ceiling tiles water-stained, one phone ringing. I had to get out. That was the only thought, a desperate, primal urge that clawed its way through the fog of exhaustion and fear. My fingers, slick with a cold sweat I couldn't quite wipe away, fumbled with the latch on my cubicle door. It stuck, as it always did, a minor annoyance that now felt like a deliberate obstruction. I wrenched it open, the cheap metal groaning in protest. The office, bathed in the sickly fluorescent hum, looked the same. Rows and rows of identical gray cubicles, the air thick with the stale scent of recycled paper and forgotten coffee. But it wasn't the same. They seemed to stretch and writhe just at the periphery of my vision. I'd been here before, hadn't I? This place, this feeling. The house had fed on it, grown fat on my isolation. And this was its final trick, wasn't it? A familiar prison built from the mundane anxieties of a life I'd long since shed. I walked, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the thin carpet. I passed my own cubicle, the screen still displaying a spreadsheet that now seemed utterly alien, a relic from another existence. I hadn't touched it in weeks, months. Time had become a fluid thing in Thorne Manor, a river that sometimes rushed, sometimes stagnated, but always pulled me further from the shore. The main corridor, the reception desk, its potted plant long dead, a skeletal testament to neglect. The large window overlooking a city that felt impossibly distant, impossibly real. I reached for the glass, my palm pressing against the cool surface. Outside, cars moved, people hurried, a world that continued to spin, oblivious. A pang of longing, sharp and unexpected, pierced through me. I wanted to be out there. I wanted to breathe air that didn't smell of decay and desperation, but the house. It was still here. I could feel its weight, a phantom pressure on my chest, even within this sterile, artificial space. The phone on the reception desk hadn't rung again. It had simply stopped. A deliberate cessation, like a predator pausing to savor its prey. My breath hitched. It came from behind the reception desk, a dry, insistent rasp. My eyes darted to the source. Nothing, just the worn laminate and the cheap plastic of the phone. But the sound persisted, growing louder, more frantic. It was the sound of something trying to get out, or something trying to get in. I backed away slowly, my gaze fixed on the spot where the sound originated. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting the room in a strobe-like effect. For a moment, the cubicles seemed to lean in, their gray walls pressing closer. The water stains on the ceiling tiles coalesced, forming indistinct, leering faces. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing them open again. It was just the lights, just the stains. A different sound replaced it, a low, guttural hum. It was a sound that felt ancient, a sound that spoke of things buried deep, things that shouldn't be disturbed. It was the sound of the house itself, awakening, or perhaps it was the sound of me finally breaking. I turned and ran, not towards the exit, not towards the city I saw through the window. I ran back into the maze, the familiar pattern of cubicles offering a perverse kind of comfort. I needed to find the source. I needed to understand what was left. I reached the end of a narrow aisle, a dead end. A single, unmarked door. It was a door I'd never noticed before. It was slightly ajar. The hum was loudest here, resonating from behind that door. It was a siren song, a terrible promise. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. My fingers brushed against the rough wood. The scratching started again, this time from inside the room. It was a frantic, desperate scrabbling like trapped rats or something worse. I pushed the door open. Something sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit. The room was small, bare, no furniture, no windows, just bare concrete walls. The hum intensified, a physical pressure against my eardrums, and then I saw it. Not a thing exactly, more like a disturbance, a shimmer in the air above the stain, coalescing, taking shape. It was the shape of a hand, a child's hand, reaching, trembling. The house had never shown me this. It had shown me my fears, my regrets, my loneliness, but this felt different. This felt like a secret, a wound. The hand reached out, not towards me, but towards the door, as if trying to pull it shut. The hum pulsed, a final, desperate throb. The stain on the floor seemed to deepen, to spread. Was this the heart of it all, the source of the malevolence? Or was it merely another illusion, another layer of the deception? The house had shown me its power, its hunger, but had it shown me its weakness? Or had it simply shown me a mirror of my own despair? The hand continued to reach, its translucent fingers twitching. The hum faded, leaving behind only the ragged sound of my own breathing. What was I supposed to do with this? What was left to resolve?